Hello, and thanks for joining me today as we talk about the female reproductive system. So, today we're going to talk about, and you will be able to identify major components being primary organs of the female reproductive system. You'll be able to describe the path an egg takes through the female body and explain what happens during fertilization. And so, here we go. So, first, an overview. This is a diagram showing you the female reproductive system, and this is what we're going to talk about. So these are the different parts, and this is what we're going to discuss today. So to start with, we have the ovaries. Ovaries are oval-shaped glands, so these two guys here, these two girls here, ladies here, pieces here, are ovaries located beside the uterus, which is this structure in the middle. Your ovaries are not, I guess if you're female, your ovaries are responsible for producing eggs. Ovaries in general are responsible for producing eggs and hormones that go along with it, and hormones that are utilized during and for pregnancy. But these are your ovaries, and this is where eggs are produced. Now, ovaries they produce your eggs, and that's a process called oogenesis. So oogenesis is egg production, and so you have these germ cells, which are primary sex cells, or cells that will develop into your sperm and egg, are called germ cells in general. So germ cells develop into immature egg cells, and these are called primary oocytes. This happens during fetal development. So females are born with somewhere between 200,000 to a couple million primary oocytes. When they reach puberty, they have about 40,000 left, give or take a couple. And then at this stage, there are about 400 that will mature during their reproductive life and allow them to potentially produce offspring. And so if you take 400-ish divided by 12 for months, you get 32, 33 years. So from the time you first undergo puberty and have your first menstrual period, you have roughly 30 years after that to produce and conceive a child. Each month, roughly 20 primary oocytes become secondary oocytes, but only one of those will go on to be ovulated and pass through your body. So this is the process of oogenesis, and going from an oocyte to potentially a zygote. And so you have your oogonium, which is essentially an oocyte, or it's a pre-oocyte. It's an oocyte that's got a diploid number, a double number of chromosomes. So this is a normal number. So you have, there's the first phase, which is meiosis 1. So remember, meiosis is essentially doing mitosis twice. So mitosis, you divide everything, or you replicate all your DNA, and you divide, so each side gets 46 pairs. So you have 46 here, it doubles, so you're up to 92, which then splits, and so you get 46, not pairs, 46 chromosomes each, 23 pairs. With meiosis, here we've doubled everything. This 2n means I still have double numbers on things. I still have 46. Then I'm going to split. Now I'm down to just 23 chromosomes in my secondary oocyte. And then we have this thing called a polar body. And so we start again with the diploid number in your primary oocyte that divides, and then you get two 23 chromosome cells. One is large secondary oocyte, one is a smaller first polar body. The difference between these two is your secondary oocyte gets all of the other components of the cell. The mitochondria, the Golgi bodies, your endoplasmic reticulum, vesicles, all of those go here. That's why it's so much bigger. This side gets DNA and a cell membrane and a little bit of cytoplasm, cytosol. So this one's not going to do a whole lot for you. This one will have all of your goodies, things that are needed for life. Your secondary division only occurs if your secondary oocyte is fertilized. Okay, so once we get to here, if this oocyte doesn't get fertilized, it just passes through the body and leaves. Now, if it does get fertilized, if you have a sperm join, So here's your sperm cell. If your sperm cell fertilizes your secondary oocyte, we produce what's called a zygote, and this is a fertilized egg. So we get a fertilized egg or a zygote, and possibly 3 of these. So you get a polar body, a polar body, and a polar body. Those are your 3 polar bodies, potentially. But you can end up with 1 fertilized egg as a result. All right. From the ovary, so we've produced our egg. It's become a secondary oocyte. It gets passed into the fallopian tubes. These little hairs here are called fimbriae, which is over here. So these are fimbriae, and they help to swoop the egg into the fallopian tubes. It helps kind of just move it along. This is where the egg will most likely become fertilized. So this is where fertilization happens most of the time, is in your fallopian tubes. And so sperm will join with the egg. You will now have a diploid number of chromosomes, meaning you'll have 23 pairs instead of just 23. And your fertilized egg or your zygote will then finish and pass on to your uterus, which we're going to get to. But there are some different parts to the fallopian tubes. We have your intramural, we have your isthmus, and your ampulla. That's all fine and dandy. I'm not going to ask you about those or quiz you on those. And then we have this infundibulum as well, are just different segments. For this course, not a huge deal. Okay? But this is your fallopian tubes. That's where fertilization takes place. So again, here's your process. Your fimbriae sweep the oocyte into the fallopian tube. Your cilia and peristalsis. Think back to the digestive system. What's peristalsis? And that's our rhythmic contraction. Move it along. So it contracts here and pushes it in this direction. Your sperm reaches your oocyte in the ampulla. More than likely, this is where you're going to be fertilized. Typically, fertilization occurs within 24 hours after you release the egg. So, roughly, you have 24 hours after you ovulate to become pregnant, which, if you think about it, are not real good odds. You have a 28-day cycle. One of those 28 days, you can become pregnant. Or you're likely to become pregnant. It doesn't mean it can't happen elsewhere, just you are likely to become pregnant in these 24 hours. That's when you are most fertile, most likely to produce a zygote and eventually end up with a baby. Your zygote will reach your uterus about 7 days later. So the first 1 day after you ovulate is when you're most fertile, most likely to get fertilized. Your egg is somewhere in this realm of things. It'll take 6 more days to reach the uterus, which is here. Okay, so if you get fertilized here, that zygote will pass into your uterus there. And speaking of the uterus is a hollow organ. Most of the time it's collapsed and very small, as in this picture. Obviously, if you stick a zygote in here and it grows and matures and becomes a baby, your uterus is going to expand. But this is when you don't have a baby, your uterus is rather small and it's hollow. The outer layer, outer being towards the middle. So in this case, your endometrium is your layer here on the inside, which is the outer, portion, is shed during menstruation. So if you don't have a zygote implant on the wall of your uterus, it will shed this layer, and that is what is expelled during the menstrual period. Your uterus goes from kind of the edge of your fallopian tubes down to your cervix, which is a contracted, closed portion of the uterus, which seals it off from the outside, essentially. And from there, it goes through or out the vagina. So this is your canal joining your cervix and the outside of the body. The vagina is roughly 4 inches long and lies between your urinary bladder and your rectum. So you can see on this diagram, this structure right in here is the vagina, which is located between your urinary bladder on one side and your rectum on the other. So it sits right in the middle. So if you would become pregnant, your baby is going to develop in the uterus, which is back behind here. This is why, as this expands out in both these directions, you will notice your urinary bladder is going to be pushed on by the baby. And that's why oftentimes pregnant women have to go to the bathroom often and frequently, is because of this baby pushing on their bladder. And so that was the journey of the egg. So it starts, it's stored and produced in your ovaries. It's released, it goes to your fallopian tubes, and that's more than likely where it's going to be fertilized. If it is fertilized, it implants into the uterus where the fetus develops, and then the fetus will be delivered through the vagina. So this is the female reproductive system. Here are some review questions for you. So work through these. If you have questions on them, please let me know. Otherwise, we will continue discussing the reproductive and urinary systems when you return to class.